A very good evening to all our viewers. My name is Barkha Dutt and you're watching The Mojo Story, our independent digital platform that does a deep dive into all the issues that really matter, issues that often get knocked off the headlines of our mainstream media. We continue our consistent focus on the farmers' protests that are showing no signs of retreating or diminishing. This as the government reaches out in yet another letter and says that it is ready for specific amendments to the farm laws. The farmers' unions, however, are saying that nothing short than an absolute scrapping of the laws is acceptable to them at this point. This government in particular is not known to blink. It's highly unlikely that the government will agree to scrap the laws or put them in abeyance. So at this point, when the government is proposing an amendment, is open to amendments, is open to perhaps giving an assurance on the minimum support price in writing, and the farmers' unions are saying nothing but the scrapping of the laws is a middle ground possible at all. Let us introduce on the program today two of our experts with very different opinions. We welcome to the program Gurcharan Das. Gurcharan Das is one of our best known authors and commentators and has a keen understanding of financial issues. We're also joined by Bharat Ramaswamy, who's a well-known economist and professor and is also a well-known columnist. And like I said, I've read enough of both of them to know that they argue the same issue of the farm laws from very different vantage points. And it would be interesting to learn a little bit more about what's at the heart of the matter. I'll start with you, Gurcharan. For me personally, because I'm not an economist, and I think this is true for many, many people in India, the laws themselves are highly technical. But the sight of, the sight of men and women and children and the plummeting temperatures, the freezing cold winter, them sleeping under tractors and trolleys, and now it's been many, many days. That is a disturbing sight. And there is a sense that no matter what your opinion is on the farm laws, the government needed to show more humility, more engagement, and less of an underestimation of the anger among farmers. And that was its first response. So I'm going to get to the laws and the specifics later. I just want to ask you what you make of these images that are unfolding, as the new year approaches at the border of our capital.
Well, it's not easy, Barkha, to do reforms in a democracy. It's like, particularly in a democracy, you have one side playing a 2020 match, which is politics. And on the other side, you have a 5-day test match, which is the economics of reforms. So the two sides are playing two different games. And so no wonder we are all spectators, confused about what's going on. And even the players who are playing in this match are confused. The lesson here really is that what you need to do is to sell reforms. And this is what Mr. Modi, the greatest communicator in the world, he forgot. And what you need to remember is that the process, Margaret Thatcher used to say that she spent 80% of her time selling the reforms and only 20% of time doing the reforms. Anyway, it is the reforms are now done. They are law, and the fact is that we do have a problem. And the other problem in a democracy is that a small organized group of people. There was a person, a man called Merkur Olsen, who showed that a small organized group in a democracy can have a voice much bigger than it's not representing the country, but it's representing a particular constituency. So these protests are not what you'd call farmer protests. They are protests from Punjab farmers and to some extent Haryana farmers. And they are protests by rich farmers. They are funded by the Artiyas, who are the main losers in these reforms. and they are concentrated in Punjab because that's where the buying, APMC buying, is the maximum. They stand to lose 1,500 crores a year, they believe. And so you have this impasse. And so what is actually the reforms are the foundation for a second green revolution. This is our
But
1991 moment in agriculture. And it is tragic that it has come to this pass. But I think there is still a way out, and we can discuss that next.
let me just push you on your point on Gurcharan, on your point on how this is the perils of introducing reforms in a democracy. You some might say you sound dangerously like Amitabh Kant when he said or lamented that there is too much democracy in India,
Oh
and
no,
I would
no, no!
argue that there
Please,
can never be
please.
too much
I mean,
democracy.
that's the worst possible thing you can say, Barkha, because I'm a classical liberal, and it is
Right.
classical liberals who created the foundation of the modern democracy. And so, it is not too much democracy. It is to learn. It is what I was saying, that what we need to understand is, and it's not just this particular government that failed in selling reforms. Right from 1991, the India has been reforming by stealth because reformers like Dr. Manmohan Singh, Mr. Chidambaram, and others have not sold the reform. They haven't told the people that there's a difference between being pro-market and pro-business. And hence people think that reforms will make the rich richer and the poor poorer, despite what all the evidence to the contrary. And because the fact is that simply reforms, being pro-market means to be pro-competition, and being pro-competition results in better quality of products for consumers. It
Okay.
results in it results in lower prices, lower costs as people compete, and it helps everybody. So therefore, the notion of the crony capitalism comes about in the case when there's a nexus between the state and the producers. And that's what we want, that's what we need to avoid. And competition to some extent gets around that.
Okay.
So,
I I have more questions on how the market and the mandi can possibly coexist, because in the model of these farm laws, the mandi isn't going. The market is supposed to coexist with the mandi, and I'm left with very sort of commonsensical questions about who will be buying in the mandi if it's the big retailers who are buying from the market. But we'll get to that. I just want a counter view now from Bharat, who has a very different perspective. Now, Bharat, I think what I'm hearing Gurcharan say is that every time you try and shake up the status quo, every time you try and bring up a disruptive set of reforms, there will be resistance, that this is not pan-India resistance. These are the farmers of Punjab and Haryana predominantly. And obviously, they are the most impacted because we're talking really about wheat and paddy. Wheat and paddy are mostly produced out of Punjab and Haryana. MSP applies more to them than to any other crops. But now, where the government is saying we're willing to place the MSP assurance in writing, which is definitely a kind of softening in the government stand, which started off by saying that the MSP just cannot be put in writing. The government is saying we're open to specific amendments. Nitin Gadkari, whom I interviewed over the weekend, said we're even willing to meet a panel of independent experts if the farmers would choose to bring them along. Do the farmers now have to meet the government midway for them to continue garnering the kind of public sympathy I think that they have managed to garner?
I think you have to see this from the perspective of the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
So, in the manifesto of the BJP in 2014, you would recall that they promised to implement the recommendations of the Swaminathan Commission.
Yeah.
And before the elections in 2019, there was a great deal of action, at least in terms of saying that we are going to we have announced these MSPs. They are 50% above the cost of production. We are in the process of fulfilling these promises. So the MSP has been associated with the central government policy and for some time, and especially with this government. So now when the central government pushes these laws, it seems like a U-turn
Yeah.
by from the point of view of the farmers.
Yeah.
So it's a there is a certain trust gap at this moment between the
Yeah.
farmers and the government, and it seems even though the government insists that this has nothing to do with MSP, but the question arises that if it has nothing to do with MSP, why is the central government pushing it? They could have allowed the state governments to pursue reforms as they were doing previously. I think the at what point farmers risk losing sympathy, I'm not sure what that point will be. I think I think there is some. They need to probably show some flexibility in terms of which laws are truly that they're opposed to. For instance, this essential commodities law is not
Yeah.
something that directly relates to them. There is no reason for them to ask for a repeal of the Essential Commodities Act. But having said that, I think the onus is on the government really to figure out how to bridge this trust gap and to explain this U-turn to them. So
Even sorry to interrupt you, even Gurcharan Das says that Mr. Modi as Prime Minister should have sold the reforms, right? So he believes that the lapse is not in the law itself, but in the communication of it. How do you see that? How do you see Gurcharan's argument that this is a potential 1991 moment that hasn't been packaged well, that hasn't been communicated well?
I think it's much more than packaging. I think the process is important. I think for instance, if you go around the country, if you talk to farmers, let's say in Maharashtra, who don't gain anything directly from MSP, but if you ask them that, what do you think about the MSP? After all, it's the farmers in Punjab and Haryana who receive it. They don't gain anything, but their position is not that their position will not be that deny MSP to them as well. Their position is we also want MSP. So there is for the farming community, MSP becomes like it's the yardstick by which they are measuring government policy, and the truth is that's the way politics has moved. So Gurcharan Das is right that there are many games being played. There's the politics and the economics of it. But if that's the way you have been going, how can you make a U-turn in a matter of days? So the thing is that the farmers of Punjab and Haryana, they have nothing to gain from these reforms. Once you have told them that you are going to give them the MSP in any case, so you're not contemplating any change in reforms. So you might even think that therefore this confrontation is needless because these laws do not really matter or are not relevant to them at all.
You're saying once the MSP is given, then the farm laws, in a sense, the new farm legislations become redundant. It becomes redundant, but actually that's not true, because even if the MSP is guaranteed, the private market, the private retailers will still have the option. There will be almost two parallel systems, right? And that could impact everybody.
My point is that these reforms that you want to do, you cannot fit them in terms of one size fits all. For Punjab and Haryana, their livelihoods, everything is derived from the MSP, and if you're saying that if we accept the government stand that the MSP is not an issue, it's not on the table, that we are committed to it, okay, then in many ways it's something that they're saying that we are not contemplating any reforms for Punjab and Haryana, so it's irrelevant to them. So why not then pursue these reforms more aggressively in states where you need new markets to be opened up,
Okay.
where the MSP process is not operative. So, as we know, for 20,
Okay.
yeah. So,
Sorry, let me just bring Gurcharan. Let me, yeah, complete your point,
so
and I'll bring Gurcharan
out
to
of
respond.
23 crops we offer for which MSP is declared, we are in a position to implement them in a meaningful way for two of them. We,
Wheat and paddy. Yeah.
so
So let me
definitely,
bring in.
yeah. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I get what you're saying. And let me bring in Gurcharan now on the specifics. Gurcharan Das, it's a big statement to make to say that this is, possibly the 1991 moment for agricultural reforms. It could be lost just because of a failure to communicate well. But here's the point, even those who speak in favor of these reforms, people like yourselves, people like Ashok Gulati, right? They're unable to really explain how these two parallel systems would work. Like at least I have not understood this because the government is not scrapping the mandi. The mandi continues, the MSP continues. On the other side, you also have the private sort of private retailers now free to buy from the market or from the farmer directly. So who is going to be buying from the mandi? It would obviously mean only the government, right? It would obviously mean only the government. So how do these parallel systems work? One. Two, there has been a proposal from certain agricultural experts who say that if you want to bridge what Bharat is calling the trust gap, you should set a threshold of trading. And you basically say that if you're guaranteeing the MSP, then you say that even private players should not be allowed to trade below that threshold. So you are actually applying the MSP not legally, but you're setting a kind of framework of trading and you're saying private players cannot buy below that level. Is that a possible sort of working compromise?
Not at all.
Why not?
You can't have a command economy and a demand economy. And
Okay.
so, if you're going to have a demand economy in the future, which is what the reforms are all about, satisfying people's needs, you can't have an MSP system operate forever. I agree with Bharat. Today, probably the best solution, because agriculture is a state subject, you have an opportunity to do a two-track system. One is for the whole country, which is the reforms, and you can have a fast track for that and a slow track for Punjab and maybe even Haryana, but maybe not Haryana because the latest survey I saw on CNN shows that 60% of the farmers in Haryana actually support the reforms. So maybe only Punjab that you need such a system where you can allow the presence, because frankly, the government right now has to feed 2 lakh retail shops with the ration shops. And so there's a system. What you don't need is the government over procuring. Today, the norm for procurement was 41 million tons. And we have, in June, we reached 97 million. That is a loss to the country of one because of excess procurement, more than the buffer that you needed. 1,80,000 crores was lost of the nation's money because of excess procurement. We know that this often leads to rats eating up in the FFC. Every
Yeah.
year you have those
Yeah.
scandals coming up. So my point here is one possibility is a kind of two-track system, one for Punjab, and then wait, Punjab will see how already the the per capita or the productivity per hectare of Punjab is only the 13th in India. The states in the south and the west have gone way ahead because they diversified into poultry, dairying, and vegetables, horticulture, fruit, whereas farmers in Punjab are stuck with this old MSP. And MSP is
Yeah.
a poison. It's a poison I mean, right now, for Punjab, let it
What,
continue,
what,
but
what,
it's
what
poison.
do you mean?
Punjab's
What do you
water
mean it's a
is
poison? What do you mean it's a poison? What do you mean it's a poison?
poison, meaning it is ruining Punjab's water. It is paddy. It's ruining the air of the north of India. It is the cost of, the subsidy to the Punjab farmer is 1.2 lakhs per year in terms of the subsidy that he gets through MSP, through electricity, through fertilizer, and so on. Whereas I think a better model for the whole country, in fact, this is the reform that really should come. That is to move away from the current system of subsidies and to move to cash transfers. The kind of thing that Telangana is trying out, the Telangana model, we must test that model in other states also. Instead of giving subsidies, give money. It's today one of the achievements of this government is that it's made it possible to target subsidies, to give it directly to the person through the jam system. And so I would say um, other possible measures that could be confidence building. He's right. Bharat is right. There's a trust deficit. These could be that we could simultaneously encourage farmer producer organizations to, like Amul came up in dairy, and there are horticulture farmer producer organizations. So to allay the fear of corporates, you could have these organizations that could help and make it give competition, as it were, to the possibility of any
Let,
exploitation.
let,
You could have
let
a
me get Bharat.
regulator.
Let me get Bharat to respond to
All
this. This
these are
has been a model,
some
Bharat, that we
ways
have.
trust building
Yeah,
measures.
yeah. Yeah, but Bharat, there have been other economists, including Ashok Gulati, who have argued the same, that you need to give, if you want to compensate the farmers, by all means compensate them, or leave it to the state governments to cushion possible losses. But that MSP is not a continuing system. They will cite the Shanta Kumar panel that finds that under 6% of India's farmers are actually impacted by MSP, and thereby make the argument that this is not a pan-India debate. This is a debate about the richer farmers of Punjab. Now, having spent the day at the protests, one of the interesting things that the farmer said to me was, so if we're prosperous, what are you saying? We should not be prosperous? So I think the farmers have pretty combative and good answers for some of these points, like, you want us to be poor. The moment we speak English, you think we're not farmers. So they're good counter stereotypes, very passionate counter stereotypes coming from on the ground. And I think the government did certainly underestimate the capacity for these farmers to hold their own. But there are valid questions of models, right? So Good Charan, Ashok Gulati, I've heard others also make this point, saying pay directly to the farmer, direct cash to the farmer, and not the MSP system. How would you respond to that?
So Barkha, as an economist, I think there is great merit in these suggestions, but I don't see them as being realistic alternatives today in the realm of
Right.
practical politics. The thing is that the minute we start talking about alternatives to MSP, or the minute we start talking about the perils of MSP in this context, I think the farmers realize that there is a subtext to these laws, that however much the government says that these laws are not meant to derail the MSP, that seems to be the intention. So I think the unfortunately what has happened is, because the central government has 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 stepped into these agricultural marketing laws, which were earlier just the domain of the states.
Yeah.
It has in fact given new life to the demand for MSPs, for not just wheat and rice, but for all crops. So I think that actually damages the credibility
Yeah.
of all reforms. So I think it's a very counterproductive thing to do at this point, to speak about dismantling MSP, because that would entrench the resistance even more. I think the thing is that in a democracy, how do you do these things? The question posed by Gurcharan right at the beginning. How do you do this? And that's the question that we must ask ourselves. So I would have preferred a policy. I don't know how things can be undone now, but I would have preferred a policy. The BJP controls many important states in the country.
Yeah.
Prime Minister Modi is personally very popular in all these places. I would have preferred that the party used its political capital to push for reforms at the state level. Then the linkage with the MSP would not have come about. And what Gurcharan mentioned is that, in fact, if you could have demonstrated the gains that come from this, then the resistance would melt. After all, Punjab farmers would see themselves lagging behind. So
Yeah.
I think that we have to create a constituency for reform. We don't have such a constituency. Then how can we, in a democracy, obviously then there will be problems, and you're then stuck at an impasse.
I think that's an interesting point, and I want Gurcharan to actually respond to it, because I can actually see what Bharat is saying, that had this come in via the state. So, for example, you today look at Telangana and you say, look, we could do what Telangana is doing. Telangana is giving cash to farmers. Telangana is giving income compensation. There is a reference, there is a workable model. You take that to other states and you say, okay, look, Punjab, you could be like Telangana, right? But when it comes from the center, Gurcharan, so more than the law, it's the process, right? More than the law itself, it's the process of decision making. There is a sense that even in a pandemic year, it was sort of, not coerced is not the right word, but it was accelerated through parliament. I'm not saying it violated any procedure, but it was a kind of a government with the numbers using muscle to get this law in. And it's a kind of ruling from the top. It's, instead of it being bottom up or a trickle up effect, it's a ruling from the top. Now, either you're going to say that's the only way reform can happen, or you can take Bharat's model and say do it one state at a time, so that it's not linked to some larger apprehension of, the corporates coming over, India becoming an oligarchy, the sort of the cronies taking over, or what Harish Damodharan has called conglomerate capitalism, which I thought was a very interesting phrase.
Well, Bharat is right. And that's why I said maybe we need to two-track the process now to salvage the reforms. And frankly, I would do a bigger study than the one that's presented today and on CNN, which showed really that the vast number of farmers in India, the vast majority, support the reforms. Now, if we can have more of that information to know that, then it's not just the BJP states. It will be Kerala. It was amazing that 90% of Kerala supports the reforms. Now, if that, by this study, you need a bigger study, and you need to show that. But you're right. Agriculture is a state subject, and I think Bharat has got a good point that you needed to win over, and certainly the BJP states could have been the leading states to go ahead. But that's water under the bridge. To go forward from here, I just think that when I say that, the Telangana model, etc., I'm speaking not as the way I would speak to a farmer. I'm speaking as a way I would speak to a policymaker to see what is the right future. The problem is India's productivity is much lower than the world productivity. We have twice the arable land of China, and we produce half the crop of China. And so there's a lot of way forward. And productivity of Punjab has declined. And so we need, the consumer today doesn't want more rice and wheat. He wants vegetables, milk, because there has been prosperity in the country from the time that we were from the mid-60s. So I would just say that the trick is now you may need to let things continue in Punjab. And the Punjab farmer will very quickly see how his neighbors will prosper under the new system. And they will come
Then
to the
wanted.
realization that they will
Okay.
realize this MSP thing, the poison. They're stuck onto it. Punjab had one of the highest, had the highest per capita income in India for years when I was growing up. I remember, and now it's like 14th or 15th. And the reason other states have come up is because they have diversified into other crops. They're Punjab.
Right.
There should be, there shouldn't be. What you've got is like a tota in a pinjra, a bird in a cage
Yeah.
who, when you open the cage, he doesn't want to fly. And what these reforms are doing is giving the chance to fly. And now, that's really the sort of sad thing
Okay.
here.
Okay, we're at the end. We're right at the end. I know you also have to leave, Gurcharan. I'll give a quick 30-seconder to Bharat just to respond to the image of the Punjab farmer as a tota in a pinjra. If ever I have met a pugnacious lot, it is the Punjabi farmer who would not quite see himself or herself as a tota. But be that as it may, I mean, Gurcharan is coming from an economist prism on this. Where does this go from here, Bharat? Quickly. Sorry, let me just unmute you. Go ahead. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, Gurcharan and seem to be in agreement here. They have to find a way in which you have to let things continue as they are in Punjab. This is not the time to dismantle the MSP. This is the time to push on farm reforms, create new markets so that we can create hubs of prosperity through exports or through catering to urban
Yeah.
markets. And so, how exactly they will do it, I don't know. That depends on the negotiating skills, but certainly no egos need be involved here at all. Everyone is working in the interest of farmers.
I mean, Ashok Gulati said that the Prime Minister should go and have a jalebi at the langar with the farmers. And I think Gurcharan and Bharat, even if you have different economic approaches to this, I think you both agree that political communication, without that, there's nothing, right? There is no reform possible without political communication. So we leave it there. We will bring you both back as this story emerges. Thank you so much for sharing your informed opinions with us. And it's such a pleasure actually to have two different perspectives, be able to reach a consensus on some areas, which gives me hope that if there were effective communication between the government and the farmers, this could actually take place. Gurcharan and Bharat, thank you so much, and we'll have you back very soon. Thank you for watching to our
Thank
audience,
you.
and see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.